A Shalom Akim, Shalom, Shalom, giving all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahushai, Ba'ashem Rakakwadash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone for teaching us truth, and salutations to the sincere Akim and Akwathi Listen. May the blessing of election be upon your house. My name is Raquai. I'm back in here with another quick and Lord's will, as always, an edifying lesson. And for today's lesson, I just wanted to go through a little bit about tithes, alms, and giving, and showing the importance of it. What does a little bit of it, come from? Because and what's really inspired this lesson was actually a topic that this Israelite, brought up, who was listening to us at camp last week, and he brought up the point about tithes and so on and so forth. And one of the things a lot of our people are very bamboozled by is that tithes is limited to physical money, right? And a lot of this confusion and this stronghold is placed forth and was brought to you in part by the Catholic Church, right? So there was a lot of miscommunication, but I kind of wanted to just read through a little bit of it. How were things back when we were actually in the land, and understanding and being practical now, because we understand that we know, as the scriptures say, we have to go to our enemies for the want of all things, right? So we don't have any land, substance, sheep, goats, cattle, things that actually have inherent riches. So how can you exemplify certain character traits when it comes to like giving and alms and so on and so forth? You know what I'm saying? So what I want to do is I want to start off with a little bit of the history of how things were, right? So let me go to this is Deuteronomy chapter 26. I'll start at verse 1, but I want to jump around, right? I don't want to make the lesson too long, but I kind of just wanted to give you an idea of how things, were, right? So this is Deuteronomy chapter 26, verse 1, and it says, "Then it shall be," I'm reading in the AMP, and it says, "when you enter the land which the Lord Yahweh, your power, gives you as an inheritance, you take possession of it and live in it, that you shall take some of the first of all the produce of the ground, which you harvest from the land that the Lord Yahweh your power gives you, and you shall put it in a basket, and go to the place where the Lord Yahweh your power chooses to establish his name. You shall go to the priest who is in the office at that time, and say to him, I declare this day unto the Lord Yahweh my power, I have entered the land which the Lord Yahweh swore to our fathers to give us. Then the priest will take the basket from you and place it before the altar of your power, of the Lord your power." Right? So, you take, this is going into the offering of first fruits, right? So they would take, a harvest from their land, right? And they would go and give it to the priests, right? So at this time, remember when we were going into the land during the time of Joshua, right? And the different tribes received their different portions of the land. Now, the one tribe that didn't receive a physical, land portion like that was the tribe of Levi. The Levites didn't receive an inheritance. Their inheritance was essentially to administer the priestly duties in the priest's office, right? So I'm going to jump down to verse... I want to jump down to verse 10. And it says, "And now look, I have brought the first of my produce of the ground, of which you, O Lord Yahweh, hath given me, and shall place it before the Lord Yahweh your power, and worship before the Lord your power. And you and the Levite and the stranger among you shall rejoice in all the good which the Lord Yahweh your power hath given you and your household, right? So that stranger refers to, when you go into the Hebrew, the word is gar, so it refers to like an Israelite, that would be sojourning in the land, right? And one of the reasonings for this, when you, as a matter of fact, let me read this and I'll make my point. Verse 12, and it says, when you have finished paying all the tithe of your produce the third year, which is the year of tithing, then you shall give it to the Levite, to the stranger, to the orphan, to the widow, so that they may eat within the gates of the cities and be satisfied, right? So the Lord put certain measures in place to make sure that the people who were less fortunate were taken care of, right? And especially the priests, as I was saying before, because remember, the priests they didn't receive a physical portion of land, during that time when we were in the land, right? So the priests, they were more caught up in doing their priestly duties, and they had to take care of the certain, to perform certain sacrifices. They had to, burn incense. They had to, what I'm saying? They had to, those are the kinds of things and the kinds of, responsibilities that were bestowed upon the priest, right? So they were essentially, the Lord, put it together in a way where, okay, they were able to perform this duty, and the other tribes that actually received a physical portion, a physical, piece of land and some abundance, it was taken, a portion of it was taken to take care of them, right? Also, as I was reading here, you have the stranger, an Israelite sojourning in the land, orphan, widow, a widow. Think about it, like that's something that's very common in this society. But like back then, a woman, and when she was married, she was taken care of, so she didn't have to work or anything like that. So now she's in a situation, she might be a bit older, she can't, maybe she can't bear any more children. So, the Lord set it up in a way that it was, these people in this society, they call that, what's that word? The vulnerable sector. So people, a little bit more, they can't really take care of themselves, like the elderly, so on and so forth, they were taken care of, right? This is an example of like a social welfare system that the Lord Yahweh Bashim Shai has set out through the laws, right? Continuing on in verse 13, and it says, in accordance with all that you have commanded me, I have not transgressed or forgotten any of your commandments. I have not eaten of the tithe of mourning, nor have I moved in any of it when I was ceremony unclean, making the tithe ceremony unclean, nor offered it to any of the dead. I have listened to the voice of the Lord my power. I have done everything accordance I have done everything in accordance with all that you have commanded me, right? So, this was part of our culture to make sure that, especially the priests were taken care of, and these less vulnerable people, right? Another good example of that is when you go through the laws on gleaning grapes. Now, this is a very interesting law, because it's essentially, it's a call to remembrance the people who are less fortunate. So how it works is that, so say for example, if you have a vineyard, right, you're planting grapes, you have a couple acres. Now when it's harvest time, you don't harvest all the portions of those grapes. What you would do is you would leave, some fall to the ground or whatever like that. You leave a little bit behind, just to make sure that these people who are less fortunate are taken care of, right? Now you start to see how important the laws of the Heavenly Father are beneficial for making sure the planet runs very well, and it wards off a spirit of greediness. And that's a sentiment that you see that's common within this kingdom, where because there is no law, the scriptures say the soul that's within him is upright. Esau is the type of person that will take and leave nothing for the people, not even for his own people, right? So he's oppressing not just, you Israelites, but he's also oppressing his own people. And this is why we say he's not somebody that is fit to rule, because he doesn't keep in mind the ways of Yahweh Bashim El Shai. The scriptures say that the multitude of the wise is in the welfare of the world. As a matter of fact, let me get that, then I'll come back here. Let's see. What's that? Wisdom of Solomon. Okay, this is Wisdom of Solomon, chapter 6, verse 24, and it says that the multitude of the wise is in the welfare of the world, and a wise king is upholding of the people, right? So, excuse me, the welfare, you're making sure that the state of your kingdom is being run properly. And through time and time again, you start to see that the opposite is occurring in this society, right? But this is more of a type of lesson to actually focus and understand the importance, of tithing. Now, one of my elders did bring up this point, at camp last week about, we work, right? So you might be thinking, okay, Raquai, I understand that, I don't have any substance I can give. I don't have anything I can give. I don't have any land. I don't have any grain offerings. I don't have any, flocks or whatever like that. I know that. That's understandable, because the scriptures do say, like I mentioned earlier, we'll go to our enemies for the want of all things. I understand that. Now, could those principles still be applied in this time and be practical? Yes. It can be, right? Because we understand that, yes, we are in captivity. We're subject to payments. We have to work, right? So I'm not denying that. I wanted to get a little bit of history, but I also wanted to show a couple of examples as well, right? If the Spirit is within you to do tithe, right? This is not a lesson to ask for tithes, because like I said, we supply our own needs. As a matter of fact, I want to get that. And this is the mentality, just to show the mentality that we are in. But, I wanted to explain a little bit about the history of how things were and operated back then in the ancient times, right? So this is Acts chapter 20, verse 30. I'll start at verse 33, and it says, I have coveted no man's silver or gold or apparel. Yea, ye yourselves know that these hands have ministered unto my necessities to them that are with me. I have showed you all things, how that so laboring ye ought to support the weak, and remember the words of our Lord Yahushai, how he said, Yahushai speaking, it is more blessed to give than to receive, right? So when you go through, Apostle Paul, and, he worked as a tent maker, right? But that's the spirit we're in, because we understand that we're not in a situation we can be, taken care of, and then we just, preach. We do lessons and edify the church and so on and so forth. We're not in that type of position, right? A lot of us, well, the mass majority of us, we work or have a business, or, what I'm saying? Like, so we understand there's a, we have a dispensation, but at the same time, we understand we're being practical at the same time, because we're not in our land. We're not, what's the word I'm looking for? We don't have the substance, to be able to perform these duties, right? But, somebody, somebody can still be able to, give, right? That's still very important too, right? Let me get... This is Sirach chapter 12, verse 1, and it says, when thou wilt do good, to know to whom thou doest it, so shalt thou be thanked for thy benefits. Do good to the godly man, and thou shalt find a recompense, if not from him, yet from the Most High Yahweh, Ba'Shem Shai. There is no good come to him that is always preoccupied in evil, nor to him that giveth no alms. Give to the godly man, and help not the sinner. Do well unto him that is lowly, but give not to him that is ungodly. Right? And Yahweh Shai said a tree is known by its fruits, right? So we have a certain mentality that, we give what we can to, brothers who are, a treasury or whatever, to help brothers in certain situations, and giving is not limited to money, right? Giving, you can give, whether it can be your time, maybe you have a particular, kind of skill. You can offer a certain type of service to help, certain people, members of a church or whatever, what I'm saying? If women might be listening, you can, you might have like a sewing skill, or you might have a cooking skill, or, some type of way, shape, or fashion you can give to help those that are on, brothers who, that essentially treadeth out the corn. They're muzzling. Let me say that properly. There's a way you can still give, but, using your talents, so on and so forth, right? And then, but as I was reading here, when you're doing good, like, know who you're doing it to, right? You don't want to be giving to somebody who's essentially a somebody who's completely transgressing the law, and he doesn't exemplify fruit of the spirit, and so on and so forth, right? So, but there's still something you can still give, right? A ride per se, and you can always start with what are you good at and what can you contribute, right? And that might be that might look different for every brother or sister that might be listening, and so on and so forth, right? And giving it's not limited to money. It can be money, right? Like when you go in, like, for example, when you go into the story of Nabal, Abigail, and King David, Nabal basically, he had the opportunity to do good to a godly man, but he didn't do it, right? He was basically just being a niggard, right? That's not who you want to be, right? He had a lot of substance, but it shows you where his mentality was, where it was at. He wasn't the type of person that wanted to actually help David and his men at that time, right? So, saying a lot here, but let me go to First Peter's, right? Just to show you also the importance of giving. So this is where was I? This is First Peter chapter 4, verse 7, and it says, "But at the end of all things is at hand. Be ye therefore sober, and watch unto prayer. But above all things have fervent charity amongst yourselves, for charity shall cover a multitude of sins. And use hospitality one to another without grudging. As every man hath received the gift, so even so administer that same to one another, as good stewards of the manifold grace of the Most High," right? So, this is an opportunity for us to be able to exemplify, being charitable, right? What is it that you can do and you can offer, you can help, and so on and so forth, right? Those kinds of things are fruits of the spirit, being able to, exemplify, brotherly kindness, whatever it is that you can do. I can't really answer that per se, but everybody has a talent they can also give, and some type of resource they can probably use to be able to help, others in need, right? So, let's go here. Okay, this is Philippians chapter 4, verse 15, and it says, "And you Philippians," I'm reading in the AMP, "know that in the early days of preaching the gospel after I left Macedonia, no church shared with me in the matter of giving and receiving except you alone. For even in Thessalonica, you sent a gift more than once for my needs," right? So you see here, Apostle Paul's commending the Israelites that were in Philippi, for actually coming to his aid and helping him, right? So here it says, verse 16, "Even in Thessalonica, you sent a gift more than once for my needs. Not that I seek the gift itself," right? Showing you again the same sentiment that we're conveying here. We're not asking for alms, right? But the Spirit, just has to be on you to be able to help, right? If you understand, you have some substance and you can share. Scriptures say, "Give according to the little that you have." As a matter of fact, let me go to that and then I'll come back to this. What's that in the book of Tobit? This is Tobit chapter 4, verse 7, and it says, "Give alms of thy substance, and when thou givest alms, let not I be envious, neither turn thy face from any poor, and the face of the Most High shall not turn away from thee. If thou hast abundance, give alms accordingly. But if thou hast a little, be not afraid to give according to that little." So whatever you might have, and sometimes you might be in situations where, you might see somebody and, for some reason they might come up to you and help, speaking from experience, what I would normally do, I may not give money, but I might offer to buy them a meal, buy them a hot chocolate. And because sometimes you see Jake in need, and you know what I'm saying, and you realize, and it's kind of humbling too, because you think to yourself sometimes, man, that could easily be me. Their clothes are torn, they're they might be on drugs or whatever. You might see an Israelite, of your own kin. They may not know that they're an Israelite, but they're probably just begging at a convenience store saying, man, you could just buy them like a sandwich with a pop or whatever. It doesn't cost you much to do that, right? For me, that's personally, not to saying this to brag, I'm just saying, you can give according to what you have, right? So you might just buy them, whatever. If the Spirit impresses you to do that, because and you just think back, right? I could easily be in that situation that he is in, right? We go through suffering. Sometimes our suffering is it might overtake us thinking that how do I say it? Let me not say it like that. Sometimes when we go through suffering, our suffering, we might get caught up in our own suffering and think twice about, man, the what we have, if that makes sense. Sometimes the suffering might engulf us to the point where we tend to forget what people don't have, or we tend to forget what we actually do have, right? Roof over our head, understanding the Lord, His name, understanding the scriptures, these things that sometimes we tend to forget because we're in the midst of suffering, right? We're looking for and just improve our situation, whatever it is, right? But the point is, give according to the little that you have, right? Whatever shape or form that might be, and that could be giving. That could be a phone call too. It doesn't have to be something physical. You can give some time to somebody who might need some help, right? um, it could be maybe, even a family member. They may not believe per se, but they might be very by the way they see you move, they might be very um, curious, and it might behoove them to come back to the Lord just by them seeing the way that you move, right? So, you know, keep in mind, alms is far up, man. Don't put a limitation on what the Lord, in terms of alms, what it can it be. It doesn't have to be something tangible, right? I'm just leaving that out there, right? Um, let me read verse 9. This is pretty much the importance of alms as well. If you, it says, "For thou layest up good treasure for thyself against the day of necessity," right? And that's very important too. You can always think about that. Think about it as rainy day money. You might actually spend something physical, but it's translating into something spiritual, because, we know we're going to times where we're not going to be able to have a lot of abundance and pleasures like we do have, like at this moment, so what I'm saying. So think of it as spiritual rainy day money, and it not in a time of affliction, the Lord can remember those things, right? Remember that investment that you made, in times of trouble, right? Having food to eat in those times, because you know what I'm saying, like we know what we know what the prophecies say about second Ezra and spirits created for vengeance and the love of many waxing cold and so on and so forth, right? So another aspect of remembering to keep alms in times of trouble. I'm sorry, in preparation, having that foresight, remembering those things, right? So think of it as a spiritual long-term investment as well when you do perform those deeds, right? Might be in a situation. Think about Elijah, because Elijah was fed by ravens, right? How amazing, you know what I'm saying? Just think out loud, right? You know, in those kinds of situations of famine and so on and so forth, right? So let me go back to Paul's message to the Israelites in Philippi here. This is Philippians 4. I'll start at verse 17 again, and it says, "Not that I seek the gift itself, but I do seek the profit which increases you heavenly. Account the blessing which is accumulating for you. I have received everything in full and more. I amply supplied, having received from Epaphroditus the gifts you sent me. They are the fragrant aroma of an offering, an acceptable sacrifice, which the Most High welcomes you and in which He delights. And the Most High will liberally supply, fill until full, your every account to the riches in glory in the Mashiach Yahushua," right? So, and the scriptures do say that riches profit not in a day of wrath, but righteousness can deliver from death, right? So this is just another aspect of giving tithes. So knowing who you give to, and also understanding the spiritual benefit of doing so, right? So taking that advantage of that opportunity to store up some rainy day money, right? Think of it like that. So that's pretty much it. I didn't want to make the lesson too long, but this is also something to keep in mind, right? So anyways, I'll leave it there. But Lord's will, as always, this lesson was edifying. Just like to give all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh Bashim Shai. Until next time, I say Shalom.